Hello everyone. Today we're going to begin sculpting our gnome sculpture. I've printed out a few pictures to reference here. I want to make the gnome original, but it's a good idea to have some reference photos to work from. Conveniently, I've been able to find 3 different vantage points of this particular gnome to work from. That's going to come in handy to be able to see a side view and a back view as well as the front view. First thing we're going to do is make the base of this sculpture. We're going to be using a pinch pot method, essentially dividing our gnome into the most basic parts. So we're going to build up the feet upon a base like this. And we're going to make a modified cylinder to make up this midsection of his legs. Then another bigger cylinder. Finally, a sphere for the head and a cone for his cap. We want our gnomes to stand approximately 7 to 8 inches tall. So we're going to be making our gnome about this large, which means the feet need to be about 3 inches. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trace the shape for my footprint. So I want these feet to be slightly larger. You'll notice I'm working on some parchment paper. Hopefully you have parchment paper or wax paper at home that you can use. I've also borrowed a plate. You could work on a plate or some other sturdy surface just to ensure that you have something stable to build from. So that's going to be my feet. They're approximately 3 inches. And we're going to start by making a flat slab that's going to fit that shape. I'm taking my butter knife. Hopefully you have access to a butter knife. I'm going to start by cutting and creating that initial slab. So I take a chunk of clay. I'm going to begin by pinching that into a nice slab size here that's going to be large enough for those 2 feet to fit on there. And we want to make this between pinky pinched thickness and thumb pinched thickness. So about this thick to that thick. We don't want to make it too fat because that could cause it to explode and crack. And likewise, if it's too thin, it's going to be too flimsy. And we want to make a pretty durable sculpture since it's intended to be in a garden. So that's just about large enough. Modify the shape a little bit. Using my butter knife, I can begin to define these into 2 pieces, 2 separate feet. I want that to be nice and even everywhere. I'm going to trim that down because I've made it a bit too large. And we want to wrap clay around the outside of this, so we're going to need to make this a bit smaller. You can hang on to this excess scrap. It's going to come in handy when we add detail later in this sculpture. There we have it. Our feet begun. They're nice and even. Before I do anything now, the next thing I need to do is cut a hole in the bottom of this base. I want to ensure that air is going to be able to get through here. Our whole sculpture is going to be hollow, so it's critical that we have a place for air to escape. And it also helps it dry evenly, so I've cut a nice size hole right there. I can refine that shape. You'll notice the overall thickness is between 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch. And you might choose to pose your gnome a little differently. We still want to start with a nice base that we can build off of. The next thing we're going to do is add to the shoes. So I'm going to take a smaller piece of slab like this, divide this into 2 pieces. It's already about the right thickness, so now I just need to shape it using our pinch pot technique. I'm going to shape that, curve that on to create the front of the shoe. I really want to blend that together securely. Now this clay is extra soft and squishy, so I don't really need to do much in the way of scoring and slipping. I'm just able to push it together, but I do want to make sure that's securely fastened. I'm going to do the same thing with this next piece. Adding that on top, pushing it down, blending it together, just like that. Now we've got to make the back of our shoes. I'm going to do this in one continuous piece. Again, I'm going to take another chunk of clay that's roughly cut to the right diameter, to the right thickness. And I'm going to build this around the back, blending it down into that base, blending the sides together, smear, smear, smear. Being careful not to fill in that hole that we've created for air to escape. And then I can take this rib and define the back of the shoes a little more. I can use that rib just like what we did with our pumpkin sculpture. I can go around. Now it's fairly structurally sound, so I can pick this up and blend it together a little bit. Make sure the bottom is evenly blended. Smooth some of that out. Define those feet. Now I'm going to continue to build up. So the next thing I'm going to do is add to the pants. And I've already got the back of his pants with that last slab. So now I just need to add a piece to the front. It's going to be a smaller piece. So I'm going to take the same size chunk of clay and then cut it roughly in half. I'm going to create a slab that goes from one side over to the other, making that cylinder that we talked about initially that's going to make up the bottom of the legs. And it's critical that we smear all of these together on the inside. That's where our structure is really going to hold together. So I'm smearing those shoes up, smearing the slabs together side by side. Because this is nice and squishy and I'm building all in one session here, everything is nice and soft and I don't need to do any scoring or slipping. I'm not worried too much about detail at this stage. We're just trying to build up the basic form of our gnome. Now have his legs and his boots. I'm going to take my rib here, and just define the two legs. I'm keeping them connected as one big cylinder. That's going to make it easier to build structurally, but I want to give the impression that they are two separate legs using this rib. And I can do this similar technique to define the base of the pants. You might have a different style of pant. If you're making a female gnome, this could be a skirt, and this would all be a slightly different shape, but the same principles would apply. I'm working around the edge, just beginning to imply where the pants are going to meet the top of the boots. Again, I'm not getting too detailed just yet. Just starting to show where some of the different parts of our gnome figure is going to be. So I've got the legs and the shoes all finished. All right, so we're ready for the top part of the gnome, his midsection. That to make it even. His midsection is a pretty large piece, so I'm going to start with a big hunk of clay. Quite a sizable chunk of clay to work with. And I'm going to begin to make this into one big cylinder. This is a lot like a pinch pot. We're pinching that even. I'm going to connect the two sides together, similar to what we did with our mugs. And now I can blend those and expand it outward. This cylinder is going to become his torso. And I want him to be a jolly plump gnome. So I'm going to expand his belly outward a bit. And I'm pinching and smearing and pinching. Looking at the overall proportions, comparing that to my reference photos. Making sure I make this properly thin enough. We want it to be even. Remember, the key to structural integrity is having even thickness to your walls. So I'm trying to blend any thin spots with thick spots to make it all the same thickness. And in general, I'm making just a big cylinder here. At some point, you're going to want to pick which side is going to be the front. this the front of my gnome, make this the back, and you can start shaping it be a little more anatomically correct. So now we're going to blend the torso together with the legs. To do so, we're going to need to use one of our plastic tools, reaching down inside and blending the legs up, smearing those up into the torso. I'm going to make sure we work our way all the way around, blending. And what I can do is I can blend from the outside as well, using that same tool. Just blend that down into that, just like so. And I'm adding gentle downward pressure here to help secure that. Now I can gently from the inside try to make this more torso-like. Getting a little bulge to his belly. Give him a nice portly belly there. And using that same pinching method, I can close off the shoulders. Still need to make sure that there's an opening. I'm going to smear that together. I'm not worried about the arms at this stage. We can add the arms a little later. And this might be a good, if you're at a good stopping point, this would be a good time to pause to allow that to set. Because if we add too much weight, it could cause the sculpture to collapse a little bit. So this would probably be a good pausing point. Let that sit while we make our head. I'm going to put this over here and cut a piece of clay. And this will be a piece of cake, having done all of our pinch pots. This is going to become our gnome head. So I round that out. Close this in. Smear and pinch. We're not focused on any of the features at this stage. And it's especially important, we don't want this head to be too thick. We want this sculpture to be a little more heavy at the bottom than it is at the top. If it's too top heavy, it's not going to be very stable. We want this to be able to stand up in a garden. So that's going to become my head. Check the proportions. I want to make sure that looks accurate before I proceed. Now I need to make my gnome hat. Now gnomes traditionally wear large pointy hats. So I'm going to take another big chunk of clay and start by making it somewhat of a cone shape. Then I'm going to pinch it open to make it nice and hollow. And this can be nice and thin. I'm going to add a little bit of a point to mine, a little curly point. Smearing from the inside. Blend this shape down. You might want to have some furry trim or something else as part of your hat to make it more unique. That's up to you. See how that's lining up. It's getting there. Now before we attach this, again, this would probably be a pretty good stopping point for pausing if you need to do something else before I attach these together. I want to take a moment and look at it. Now to attach this, because we want air to be able to travel through the entire sculpture, it is critical that we make sure that we have a hole in our head for air to attach up into the top of our hat. Otherwise, our hat will most certainly explode and take most of our gnome and our neighbors' gnomes with us. Now I'm going to create a hole. And to lighten the weight, I can even go ahead and make this pretty big. That would give me a chance to actually blend this a little more. This would be a good time to add a little bit of water. And then using the hole underneath, I can push to blend those two clay bodies together. So I'm pushing down from the outside, pushing out from the inside, and adding that hat like so. And that would be a good pausing point. We haven't added any detail. We've got the main pieces together. But if you wanted to continue, here's how we're going to attach this to the shoulders. This is going to be tricky because we're not going to be able to blend from the inside. So what I'd like to do to really ensure that we create a good connection, I'm going to take a little bit of clay here, a little scrap clay, make a little coil, add a little water, make a coil. I'm going to add this coil around the base here. And blend that so that I can extend this piece, elongating it so that it can go inside of this shoulder cavity. So like we did when we beveled the edges of our mugs, when we put the two sides together, we're creating a little piece that's going to push inside of this shoulder opening. We're going to do the opposite here, so we're going to actually kind of flare this up a little bit. And we're going to take some water. Now, if you have let this sit for a day, if you didn't do this all in one session, you're going to have to do a little scoring. So you should have either this tool or another tool that has some scratchy edges to it. So we're going to use this to score. Just scratch, scratch, scratching. And you can scratch this as well. So we're going to score this. Then we're going to take some water and smear that around until all those lines go away like this. I'm going to do the same thing on the opening here. So this part is going to insert inside of there, and we want this connection to be positioning it just right, making sure we're happy with how it's positioned. Add a little downward pressure. And then to really secure this, we can take one of these plastic tools and blend around the edges. And because I built this all in one session, it's somewhat precarious. It's really a little wobbly, a little squishy. You might find it's easier to do this over a couple of days so that you don't have to deal with the clay being quite so soft. And there we have the beginnings of our gnome. We'll pick up next time and I'll show you how to add the detail, including the arms and the beard and some of his clothing and other details.